The Overwatch mid-season patch is finally here, and there are some huge changes that change the best and worst characters in the game. Tanks have a new buffed role passive, including a 25% damage reduction to critical headshot damage, and a knockback resistance increased from 30% to 50%. This plus the many other targeted hero changes can have a dramatic effect on the meta as a whole, so in this video we're going to break down the 10 big winners of this new patch. But after all this time, all these videos, it says only 20% of you are subscribed. So if you haven't subscribed, consider subscribing, and if you're not going to subscribe, let me know down below what I could do or what videos I could make that would earn that subscribe from you. Anyways, let's get into it. Now, the first character on the list is a character that actually does get weaker with some of these changes, but will still be very powerful, and I want to make that clear, and it's Tracer. Now, with the new armor changes, Tracer's going to feel a little bit worse because specifically rapid fire damage and shotgun type weapons are going to be a little bit less effective against armor. That being said, it's not going to be a big enough change to make it so that Tracer is not viable, especially in the hands of someone who is really good at Tracer or understands your role in a composition. Tracer has consistently been meta for a long time, in and out of multiple different types of metas, including being played in brawl compositions, dive compositions, able to trade resources at just a much better rate than many other characters, and able to exploit weaknesses in enemies' compositions. Add to that the fact that the headshot damage reduction could actually increase the viability of dive tanks, which Tracer of course is going to synergize the best with. I think all around Tracer is still going to be a dominant force in the meta going forward. Now, for my one tip on Tracer, I would make sure that you're routing appropriately to set up the type of engagements you want. You don't always have to be fighting the enemy over and over again, but you want to be in a position that allows you to conserve your cooldowns while still being able to access enemies when you're ready to engage them. Strong positions are really hard to flush you from and give you the flexibility to engage on the target once they use cooldowns or are being targeted by your teammates and there's an active engage going on. Now, next up, we do got to talk about Winston. And I think notably having more knockback resistance and especially having 25% damage reduction on your headshots is a huge deal for Winston because he's the one that actually suffered from this the most. Being able to get blown up midair, being able to get targeted, dueled in a lot of cases. Winston's had to play really disciplined with their bubble, and they just didn't have a lot of survivability. You don't want to have to waste your own bubble for your survivability when you're playing in the neutral, and overall, I think that this is a really big change for Winston. Winston was already seeing play in the hands of people that were really good with them in the previous meta, but I think even more than that, Winston being more survivable and being able to just generally do more is going to really enable dive DPS around him to start to make more impactful plays. They can engage for longer. The Winston's going to be more self-reliant, and overall, I really do think that this could be a turning point. Maybe it's not quite enough, and you would need a little bit more on top of this to make a full-blown dive meta, but I do think that at the very least, Winston is going to be substantially stronger, and I'm definitely very biased to dive in general, so I think that's a good thing. Now, for my one tip on Winston, against compositions that you feel like you can't go all in against, if you don't have a designated dive composition and an exploitable backline, you need to create space by splitting the front line from the enemy backline supports, forcing an enemy to either get out of position, the support, or forcing the front line to back up, and you're oftentimes going to do these soft engages where you're either walking in and bubbling, just trying to poke at the front line, or try to put yourself in a perch and fall down, poke and jump away. These are the cycles that allow you to build your ult charge and make it so that you can commit to a much stronger engage later down the line. Most of the time, people in lower ranks can't get Winston to work because they just see a target and jump on a target, and they don't prioritize their own life or any of these setup phases, so definitely keep that in mind. Now, the next character on the list is our first support, Brig. And Brig is getting a really important buff. Specifically, they are going to be able to get another bash when they activate their ultimate. So you can bash a target, pop your ultimate, instantly bash again because it's going to get off cooldown. And that combo is incredible and allows you a lot of burst damage with the stun attached, or you have a lot of flexibility. Let's say you really need to get out of a fight. You could dash away, pop your ult, and then stun somebody that's chasing you. So let's say someone is trying to duel you, you're low. You try to dash away with your bash, and then you turn around, pop your ult, and then you stun them back. Or maybe you even bash again away. There's a lot of opportunities here for you to make a really crazy aggressive play and defensive play with the double downing of your bash using your ultimate, and I think that overall that's a really great thing for Brig. Plus the fact that overall, Brig still has a really high win rate in most ranks of play, a very consistent character that I think often gets overlooked, but very reliable value, really good at keeping the key players on your team alive, keeping the annoying characters off them, keeping your Anas alive, keeping your carry DPS alive. Brig is just a phenomenal character to play in ranked, and I think this makes her just that much better. Now, the one tip that I'll give you on Brig is, while it is important to try to keep your Inspire up as much as possible, don't try to put yourself in a bad position to force Inspire over and over again at the cost of you being not in the places that you need to either help your team or stay alive. Way too many Brigs get too aggressive trying to trigger that Inspire, when the reality of it is, when the fight starts, you will have many opportunities often to trigger that Inspire. Try not to get yourself out of position and get yourself killed trying to get the Inspire off. Now, the next character we got to talk about is Sojourn, and yeah, Sojourn was dominant before and still dominant after the patch, probably will be dominant till the end of frickin' time, and especially when we talk about this headshot reduction and the knockback, which doesn't matter at all to Sojourn. Really, the fact that a Sojourn is incentivized to just shoot body shots against a tank and then try to duel DPS means that these buffs to tanks just don't matter to Sojourn. Like, it doesn't matter if the front line's more tanky. The front line could be infinitely tanky and Sojourn would be the best DPS. Sojourn just gets better and better as we move towards this type of meta and stronger tanks and harder to kill tanks, and Sojourn's going to be able to kill the things that is actually important, you know, things in the back line, Anas and DPS, shut them down. Even if this tank's unkillable, Sojourns can keep their distance, Sojourns can back up, Sojourns can still farm their rails, and yeah, they're just gonna do everything that Sojourn has always done, and Sojourn's gonna continue to be probably the best DPS in the game, or at least second fiddle to Tracer. Maybe they go back and forth first or second for a very long time. But if I was gonna give you one tip on Sojourn, I would say that when you are setting up a rail and you're in a position where you're relatively safe, it's okay to minimize your movement to try to maximize your accuracy, right? It's very similar to what I talk about with Widowmaker, where you're trying to plant your feet and focus on the shot, especially while enemies are not aware of you or they're not ready for that shot. And if you're moving, jumping, flying through the air as Sojourn, it's going to be a lot harder for you to hit that shot than if you're just standing still and posting up and trying to hit that shot. Now, you can't do this all the time, and you can't do this when you're under pressure. You'll just die, but it is important that in that small window of time, your movement doesn't matter nearly as much as your accuracy. And as weird as it seems, with everyone always fiddling around and moving around and spazzing around so much, sometimes just randomly stopping is actually a mix-up in movement that is really hard for people to react to. I know it seems strange, but you would be surprised. Now, coming up next is a tank Junker Queen who gets a faster shout from 14 to 12, can use it with other abilities, but I think the most important thing about this specifically is that Junker Queen is just going to be flat better because of the shout, and then also the headshot damage and critical damage and knockback resistance. All of that is super important for Junker Queen. Junker Queen is the most fragile tank in a lot of ways. They die very easily, especially to headshots and crits. Like a Junker Queen, you could be playing on the front line, you get dinked, and then all of a sudden you have to just use a shout defensively, which is terrible. And the fact that you get more shouts and you're more survivable without needing an ability is amazing. And I think it really enables Junker Queen to be even better. Junker Queen has always been consistently good in ranked, a great Smurf character, a pub stomp character. Like if you're the best player in the lobby, you can dominate on Junker Queen. But I think even now, being able to do some type of Junker Queen dives and enable a Junker Queen brawl, I really do think that these are good changes to Junker Queen overall, and it's going to make her that much better. Now, the one tip I would give you for Junker Queen, I've coached a lot of Junker Queen players, and I would say you need to make sure that you are setting up for these combinations of shouts and cleaves, right? I see way too many people just shouting to just cross through open space, or they're just shouting to stay alive. But the golden scenario, the bread and butter, the honey, is shouting and cleaving combined. You shout to close in that gap, and you cleave them, and you get cleave resets, and you just kind of go off, right? And that's like the golden standard that you really want to do. So oftentimes you want to set up on corners, and you want to get closer to enemies before you shout. You don't want to shout to get close to them. You want to be close to them and then shout. And I understand that there's going to be moments where you have to shout to stay alive, but realize that there was probably a mistake that you made somewhere along the way to force that cooldown from you. And the less that you have to get forced to use your cooldown, and the more that you get to set the terms of the engagement, the better and better you'll be on Junker Queen, and the more wins and carry fights you will have, straight and simple. The next character that we do gotta talk about is Baptiste, and Baptiste has just been incredibly strong this past half season, and doesn't look like that's gonna go anywhere anytime soon. Now, Orisa's pick rate might fall off a little bit, which might make Baptiste a little weaker, but I actually doubt that that will be the case. I think Orisa will still see tons of play, and even outside of those compositions, Baptiste is overperforming consistently, basically across the board. The thing about Bap is he just does it all. He can do damage, he has great utility that can keep his team alive, and he is incredibly hard to deal with. As a diver, as a DPS, as anything, it's very hard to get through the layers of Baptiste's mobility and his utility. And I really do think that Baptiste is just this all-around character that is really easy to get consistently high value with. One of the best characters I would suggest for low elo period, and definitely is a character that can dominate in every elo for sure. But if I were to give you any tip on Baptiste, I would say to make sure that you're using abilities with intent and that you're not wasting abilities when they're not needed. So oftentimes, Baptiste will take a little damage and they'll just pop their heal or their shift, or they'll just make themselves invulnerable and just throw down their immortality field. And I want you to try to squeeze more value out of everything you can. Oftentimes, if a teammate dies or if you die, you can go back in time to a point where you wasted an ability. And if you really want to get great at Baptiste, I want you to do that. I want you to go into your games you lost, look at all your deaths, just rewind it like 30 seconds, and look at a moment where you use an ability that you could have positioned better or just not used, and then you would have had that ability when you needed it to save your life in a very important moment. The next up is character 7 on the list. It's definitely Echo. And Echo is actually receiving a buff from 4 to 4.5 ultimate times gain. When you're using your ultimate, you copy a character, you're going to get your ultimate that much quicker, and you're going to be able to maybe even do 2 ultimates a higher percentage of the time. But more importantly, I think it creates a lower fail rate where you're going to be able to at least get an ultimate off from something you copy a much higher percentage of the time. Even if it's just only 1, it's still going to be very impactful, probably going to win you the team fight. And even outside of this buff, Echo has been a sleeper for a very long time. I think a lot of people are finally waking up to it, especially as of season 9. Before that, Echo was actually still very, very good, but it's not a very easy or approachable character to learn, mainly just because Echo operates so much differently than many other characters in the game, and if you're not playing her at like a reasonable level, you're gonna get bodied by like the infinite hit scans that are seeing play. But now people are waking up, grinding the character, learning, and dominating the ladder. There's Echoes all over top 500, and Echo is just a very strong character that I think really targets the meta in a very different way that makes her hard to play against if you're really, really good. Also, it's important to note that Echo is still going to be able to punish a lot of tanks in a very similar way that they did before, because headshots weren't really a big deal as part of the combo. You sticky them, you shoot them a little bit, you beam them down. You're still going to be able to punish divas and all sorts of tanks out of position. And if I were to give you one tip to become a much better Echo, I would say who you copy is very important, because the 2 ways to get very consistent and reliable value is either a character that can protect themselves instantly, so something that actually can stay alive and you'll be able to operate in the ultimate for a good amount of time. So think like Zarya, you can double bubble yourself as a hypothetical, and this is going to allow you to keep yourself alive. And there are other characters that can do this as well, ways to keep yourself from dying instantly. But the other way is to copy characters that have really powerful abilities that you can access right away instead. So think like Ana, where you can nade and sleep something, and then you could pocket one of your teammates, get them all to full, and then maybe even ult. But it's not as important here because the nade and the sleep alone is going to be able to potentially change a team fight. And that's really important when you have abilities that don't require as much setup, but they can just get instant value. These are going to be great characters to copy as well. I would say like the third way is just not getting overly greedy with it. Like, it's fine to copy someone that you just get to beat in the 1v1. I can't tell you how many times I've just copied an enemy Genji, killed him because he's committing to me thinking he can kill me, I kill him back, and then I get to walk into the fight as a Genji with another dash, and I already got my value. So even if I, lose the duplicate right away, I still secured the 1v1. So trying not to get too greedy with your ultimate, finding that guaranteed value, or trying to find ways to make sure that you stay alive long enough to get more value through the length of the ultimate. These are the things that I would suggest most for you. Now, next up, we do got to talk about Sigma. And if you haven't seen the clips, here's a couple of them right here on the screen you can see.
Fuck it. Cool.
They made it so that you no longer needed line of sight to the center in order to ult people, which I just have to ask, why? Like, why is that a thing? I think one of the ways that you could actually counter Sigma ultimate is by hitting him with a skill shot or some type of CC to stop him, and he had to peek line of sight, so it was possible to do so, but also he could like have his shield there, so there was ways he could counterplay as well. So it was like a fine balance, and they just kind of took away all of that. And we're also seeing things where people get to be ulted and the Sigma isn't even close to them, like they're on a completely different floor. It's pretty nuts. But overall, I think that that's not really going to make Sigma like better or worse in the meta necessarily, just because Sigma has already been at the top of the meta. He's already been very, very strong, especially on the maps that he's needed on. Circuit Royale, Havana, I mean, Sigma is just 100% needed to play on those maps, and this just makes him that much more effective in a way that means his ultimates are basically impossible to stop. Sigma is priced to get better and better, and he's already been just established as one of the best characters in the entire game. I would definitely suggest any tank player at least be able to play him competently, because if you're going to be thrust on the maps that he's needed on or really meta on, and you don't play him, you have to either play crazy above and beyond what is expected of you on the tank role in order to make up the difference in pick, or you're going to be thrust in a mirror where you're just going to get bodied against someone that actually knows how to play Sigma. So at the very least, you should know how to play Sigma and practice him a little bit. And if you want one tip to make you a much better Sigma player, I would tell you that Sigma is really good at flushing people out of positions, especially DPS and supports. You can just force them away from strong positions. I can't tell you how many times I see a Sigma player play on Junkertown and they just walk main with the cart and they allow enemies to stay above them, constantly shooting down. Instead of going up the ramp, jumping across the gap, and then forcing enemies off the high ground or fighting them up there, Sigmas will consistently play in bad positions that don't force movement from the enemy. Because keep in mind, if you walk close to any DPS or support, they have to back up. They cannot fight you straight up. They will lose every time. They have to back up, and that is space. You're creating space, and now all of a sudden, you're applying pressure to the enemy backline, and your team can push forward. The enemy's high ground is less contested, and there's so many examples of this where a Sigma needs to try to force enemies off a position first, before then proceeding with the objective or the cart or whatever the case may be. Now moving on to number 9, Ana. And Ana is a character that has felt a little lacking in the past couple of seasons, mainly because we've been in a hard mobility meta a lot of the time where an Ana would get left behind and then killed, whether it's Flashpoint or just when you're playing a dive composition with Ana's going to get left behind, and then she's going to get targeted again and again, and she doesn't really have as much means to defend herself, right? But there's a couple of things that are important to point out. Number one, regionally, if you look at the Asia top 500 region, and you just look at the region as a whole, Ana's seeing a lot more play in that region. And I do think that Ana can still work, even though there are exploitable weaknesses to her, namely her mobility. If you position very, very well, you rotate discipline, and you are mechanically good. Like, you're able to, at the very least, stall a duel out because they're threatened by your ability to hit your shots and your sleeps, or you just hit these abilities and you win your duels. We see other regions like NA and EU actually push towards Baptiste a little bit more, and I do think that Baptiste gets easier value than Ana, even in the higher levels of play. But I think news of Ana's death, especially in ranked, has been greatly overstated, and Ana can still definitely be a dominant force, and even more so, I think, as we push towards these future metas, with characters like Brig, which is a really great natural pairing to Ana, being better, and then other characters that can utilize Nano being played more and more. I think there's a lot of characters that can really hard carry with Nano, and when we're talking about ranked play, having a simple combo that just gets you guaranteed team fights can be the difference between just winning a game easily or just really struggling because you're always behind in economy. Because if you ever have a situation where you invest a lot of ultimates and it doesn't result in a 2-1 team fight, then you're going to be behind the whole time. Now, I'm actually going to give you 2 tips on Ana. The first one is very similar to the Baptiste tip, where you're making sure that you are not wasting utility that you need to stay alive, and you wasted it and then died. And I've coached more Ana players than probably any other character in the game, and one of the things I see so often is the enemy will be playing characters like Tracer, Genji, Winston, something that will target you, come after you, try to kill you, and Anas will just be chucking their sleeps across the map, chucking, praying for a sleep that may or may not result in value, but what will guarantee result in value is sleeping that Winston when he jumps on you, or sleeping that Tracer when she tries to blink on you. And it's not that the players I'm coaching can't hit the sleep, because they're not even getting the opportunity to try, because they're wasting their sleeps before that opportunity presents itself. And it's super important that if you feel like you can't climb on Ana, I want you to go back in your replays, I want you to look at your deaths, and I want you to see your ability use leading up to your deaths. If you have your sleep, and you have your nade, and you play corners well, it is so hard to duel an Ana. And the second tip I'll give you is the difference between a good Ana and a great Ana. A good Ana does what they need to do at any given moment. Their team really needs heals, they're going to heal, but in the moments that they don't need heals, they're going to be doing damage, and then their team needs heals again, and they're going to go back to heals, and they make sure that their team has what they need, but they're still going to be doing other things when their team doesn't. The difference between that and a great Ana is a great Ana finds ways to intermingle those things very quickly. Damage, heal, making sure that you are finding little moments to be efficient and effective at any given second. If you don't understand what I'm talking about, go watch any top 500 streamer on a player. There's a lot of them out there, and just notice what they do at every given second. How many different targets do they swap to? How many different people do they heal? How many different people do they damage? How many different abilities do they use? If you just default to just sitting there, healing, focusing on one thing at one time, you're gonna be capped in the maximum value you can get from Ana. Now, if you made it this far, definitely press that subscribe button, and let's talk about number 10, Cassidy. Now, Cass has been in a very strange state ever since Season 9, because we saw a dramatic uptick in his pick rate just from being so tanky and hard to interact with, meaning that he could survive a lot of types of utility, he could stand there and threaten lethal damage on a lot of characters, and he had good matchups against most of the characters in the game that were trying to come after him and target him, whether it be die DPS, or tanks that just wanted to press him and push him. He could output a lot of damage. Now, it is important that his lethality against tanks isn't going to be as much as it was before. It's still going to be reasonable, but he's not going to be able to double headshot or triple headshot a tank and all of a sudden they die out of nowhere or they're forced to back off. But Fan the Hammer is still really effective and really strong, and I think it's also a good way to keep a lot of tanks in check. And I do think that especially for anti-dive strategies, Cassidy is one of the best DPS you could pick, because he just forces enemies to respect him, and he's hard to kill, and that's pretty much all you need on this character. Even though his magnetic grenade is awkward and clunky, it's still an ability that a lot of characters, especially mobility characters, have to play around. But if I were to give you one tip on Cassidy, I would just say that for high noon especially, there's two really great ways that you can use it. The first way is to use it when enemies have to push onto a space and you're using it preemptively to deny them that space. A great example of this is, let's say you're on Koth and you have control of the point, enemies have to contest very, very soon if they want to stop you from winning. You're going to pop your ultimate right before, so they have to push into your ultimate or deal with you somehow if they want to actually take space on point. Even better if you combine it with one of your teammates and say, hey, can you shield me? Or hey, can you immortality field me? This is something that you could do to basically ensure a guaranteed fight win. Enemies could be walking into the fight with a whole bunch of ultimates and just lose straight up to your ultimate, which is really great. I think it's also important to note that your ultimate makes you a lot more survivable. So if enemies are coming in with an ability or an ultimate that is going to do a lot of damage to you, whether it's a coordinated dive, whether it's a blade, whatever it is, your ultimate can often allow you to survive long enough to let you turn the tables on the enemy or just shut them down entirely. But these are the 10 characters that are the big winners or the big meta players going forward after the mid-season patch in Season 10. But definitely let me know if there's any characters you think I missed in the comments down below. Ask me any questions, and like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next time.